Hi, welcome to the Patreon Q&A for November 2023. So this month I've got 3 questions. I'll jump straight into it with the first one. From Peter. I'm enjoying my Wolfrip campaign, but I'd like the players to interact more in character with one another and with NPCs. How could I encourage this? Just to qualify, I already ask things like, how would X react to that? Or suggest, let's play this out of character. Or, let's play this out in character. And offer bonus XP for good moments that develop character relationships. Perhaps when I'm a player in a one-shot, I could model it more, or perhaps I shouldn't worry about it. I totally get this. I GM a lot. I have GM'd for many years, and this is one thing that you, as a GM, always want your players to do. You want your players to be more in character. You want them to role play their characters a bit more. But the reality is there are some people who are more comfortable not getting into character, and I think that's absolutely fine. It can be a little bit frustrating for us as GMs to think like, oh, that character's just not interacting with the story like the others are, and how can I encourage them to do that? But for some people, especially people who are a bit more introverted, they're still engaging with the story. They're just engaging with it in their way, and they don't feel comfortable getting into character. And I think trying to encourage them to do that, to them, is going to feel like they're being forced into doing that, and it's going to make them uncomfortable. So bearing in mind that this is a social, especially when you're playing with other people, it is a social hobby, and I think making somebody act in a way that they're uncomfortable with is not going to be fun for them. So I would say don't stress about it, and the things you're doing already are good. However, I would say that if you do have people in your group who are not comfortable with playing in character, then having things like XP incentives are going to be punishing for them, or they're going to feel like they're being punished because they're missing out on some in-game benefit by being in their comfort zone. And I think that's something really I would personally steer away from. So it's a kind of a quick answer, but it's one that I think there is no magic golden bullet here, because everybody's different. Everybody has different levels of comfort with this sort of thing. If it's somebody who's not particularly introverted, but they might be new to role playing, then there's also that bit where it might feel weird for them to role play in character. And I think just let them gradually come out of their shell in their own time, rather than trying to, push them into the pool to help them swim. That's my opinion anyway. So thanks, Peter. Kobiak's got the next question. Hi, Matt. Could you say something about your attraction to Year Zero Engine as a more traditional RPG system, as opposed to other more story game focused systems? What is it you like about it, and why did you choose it for Stiletto? As I see it, trad games often have rules to check if characters manage to do what the players say they do, and in many ways simulate a shared physical universe for the characters. Story games, powered by the Apocalypse Forged in the Dark, on the other hand, often have specific moves for different character types, and if there is no special rule that kicks in, the characters get to do what the players say they do. In other words, players share narrative control with the GM and may quickly change the fiction rather than making skill checks. My experience with the story games is limited, but I have played Dungeon World, Forged in the Dark, and Brindlewood Bay. Especially the last one was fun, but there is something about trad that I think has the potential for more freedom for the players rather than following a laser-focused playbook. For those not familiar, trad means traditional, as in like a traditional role-playing game, like Dungeons and Dragons, Call of Cthulhu, etc. So, Kobiak, it's a good question. I would say that one of the attractions to the Year Zero engine is that it does actually marry up a lot of elements of the narrative game space and the traditional game space, and kind of pulls them together in a way that I really like. There aren't moves, and that's good because I really dislike moves. I've played and run some story of these like typical story games. I've run Blades in the Dark. I've played Cult, Fellowship, and there's one I'm probably forgetting. Cult was my favorite of the experiences because it is also a powered by the Apocalypse game, but it actually pulls in a lot of traditional gaming as well. Because there's 2 things that I really don't like about effectively powered by the Apocalypse and its spin-offs, including Blades in the Dark, and that is playbooks and moves. And I totally get why they're there. The playbooks are basically making it so that the game experience is as the designer wants it to be. And the moves are effectively, I think the concept behind them is that they're trying to help people to interact with mechanics in an interesting way. But in my experience, many games are designed so that there are too many moves, and it just becomes a little bit ridiculous. Like, why do you have moves to just basically explain how to do things that you could just figure out with common sense? And I personally feel that a traditional game system is much more open and to players basically being able to try things, because you have this sort of simulation, as you put it, element to it, where players are modeled in terms of their physical attributes and stats, their mental attributes and stats, their social attributes and stats, typically. And then combat gets a big focus, because combat is something that is hard to role play. You can role play a conversation with somebody. You can't really role play out, attacking I don't know, another person, a bandit or something, and figure out, who's going to win. So there's this kind of, and of course there's obviously the wargaming roots to it as well. But from my perspective, and I'm also, by the way, very happy with narrative combat too. I just think it does. There are people who say that combat should have no additional rules. It should just follow the base rules of the game, whether that is a move for combat, just like there's a move for, influencing somebody. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think it depends on the game, the themes of the game, and a lot of the games that I like do have combat as one of the themes, or violence is kind of baked in as one of the themes, and it's perfectly fine for me to have violence there as a mechanic, or having combat as like one of the most fleshed out mechanics in the game. I'm going off track a little bit, but what I want to come back to is say that it's not just these typical story games that you've mentioned that do a lot of narrative things and hand narrative control over to the players. The Walking Dead, the newest Year Zero engine game, one of my favorites in terms of its mechanics, has a ton of narrative elements to it that basically encourage thinking outside the box and focusing less on system simulation and more on, the story itself. That said, it doesn't really have that shared fiction element that, typical Powered by the Apocalypse games do. For my money, I'm a big solo player, and while I do love Ironsworn, which is kind of like a spin-off of the Powered by the Apocalypse, it has a ton of moves. It doesn't have playbooks, but it has those moves. But when it comes to solo play, I've designed a couple of solo systems now. And for me, I think that there's far more freedom to interact with the story and the fiction in a solo set of rules, even if you're playing as a GM with a group, rather than following the moves thing. Because moves to me feel very constricted. They're telling you, this is how you have to play out a specific thing that you want to do, and here are the results that are going to happen. And I get that it's trying to laser focus, as you say, on the themes of the game, but that's another thing I disagree with to an extent, because the game, when it gets to the table, should be whatever the table make out of it. And I think with story games, you get this, like, the creator of the game is so focused on trying to get what they think is the game across to the GM and the players, that there's very little wiggle room in terms of how the moves and the playbooks are put together to only play the game as the designer wants it to be played. Blades in the Dark is a great example. Other Powered by the Apocalypse games as well are a great example. Cult, I think, is a little bit more open, again, because it has a lot of moves, but you can kind of, the playbooks are so open that you can kind of do whatever you want with it. Ironsworn as well, because it's so open, it allows you to really kind of go off piste and do really anything with it. And the moves are a little bit more applicable to other genres and things. So while, of course, there are elements of the mechanics in a traditional game that are trying to enforce the themes of the game that you're playing, for example, Call of Cthulhu has sanity mechanics, and that's basically telling people that sanity is a big part of the game. The mechanics are there to reinforce that. Would you play Call of Cthulhu to play a lighthearted romantic comedy? Probably not. You could. You just would be ignoring the insanity elements of it. And we're not going into a discussion on role playing in Japan right now. But yeah, I think I kind of rambling a little bit. I think for me, what I like about the Year Zero engine is that it feels like a nice mix between traditional and narrative games. There are things like aspects from Fate Core, for example, that are kind of sort of there in the Year Zero engine. Again, the Year Zero engine is kind of a really hard thing to describe because there's so many different games with that in that engine. Tales from the Loop, for example, is extremely narrative. There are no rules for combat, for example, and NPCs don't have any stats at all. And yeah, it's incredibly open and freeing, and the players can do whatever they want. Yeah, so it has that nice element to it, and I like the structure of here's a game, here's the setting, here's some things that you can do in it, and the collaborative telling stories. I don't really care about myself very much, probably because when I first played a Powered by the Apocalypse game, which was Fellowship, I played it with my D&D group, and this is how I got back into role playing in 2011, I think it was, when I started. And it was a D&D group, and I never liked D&D, but I really wanted to role play. So I got into this group, and after a few years, I started GMing other games like Mutant Year Zero and a bunch of other things as well. I got into Fate Core for quite a long time, or I got our group into it. But we started off as a D&D beer and pretzels type of group. Beer and pretzels means that it's more about having fun and not really serious role playing, because that's how a lot of people play D&D in my experience. Which is fine. Other people played hard role. Anyway, I'm not going down that rabbit hole. My group was very much a beer and pretzels group. And when it came to playing the Powered by the Apocalypse system, that shared narrative made things just really weird and zany and crazy, because nobody really had the same vision for what the story was about, and everybody wanted to input their own like zany ideas into it. We also tried to play Microscope a few times, and every time some of the group had a lot of fun with it, the ones who like coming up with the zany, crazy ideas. I never really liked it because it was kind of like I prefer more serious role play myself, and I love horror role playing games, for example, and it's hard to do beer and pretzels with a horror game. Anyway, and that whole kind of like I need to be careful with my wording here, because it's a perfectly valid way to play games if everybody in your group is on board with it. I wasn't on board with it. We didn't kind of sync in terms of our role playing preferences, and therefore my experiences with shared narrative were always kind of like, oh, this is really stupid. I don't know, I really didn't like it. So I think that's probably, my opinions are probably very much focused on those experiences. If you've got a good group who are all into Powered by the Apocalypse and are really into the themes and the stories, and they're all wanting to help build the narrative, and they're all kind of bouncing off each other in a really good way, then it's going to be a very different experience. And all power to those groups. It's just not something I'm interested in. And yeah, maybe I could be converted over to it, but I have very little desire now, especially as I've started getting to solo role playing, because with solo role playing, you can take a lot of the principles and apply it to either a co-op game or a GM game. And really the entire game opens up to the players in terms of what they can do and how the world interacts back to them, where it's not like a traditional story that's happening. And I think for me, that's the future, is to bring solo tools into all role playing games, to have that kind of open freedom and allow the players to kind of, they want to do something. Well, let's ask the Oracle what the response is. And I think that's, for me, makes for a more interesting experience than the very constrained and confining, as I find, experience of how typical story games do things. Okay, our last question comes from Your Evil Twin. In your games, you use the original D6 dice pool version of the Year Zero engine rather than the step dice introduced in Twilight 2000 and Blade Runner. This also seems to be the case with other people developing Year Zero games, and even Free League themselves, who have gone back to the D6 dice pool for The Walking Dead. Do you feel that the D6 dice pool system has advantages over the step dice version? I know some players enjoy rolling huge handfuls of dice, but I've always found it a bit inelegant, and if you aren't using a dice tray or dice tower, you end up with dice all over the place and falling on the floor. A game that uses polyhedral dice can more appeal to the D&D crowd that already have collections of fancy multi-sided dice. When it comes to the D6 dice pool system, I understand that adding or subtracting 1 or 2 dice to do a +1 or -2 modifier is nice and straightforward, but if someone has a high attribute and skill and rolls lots of D6s, if you fail and then push the dice, it also increases the chance of rolling a 1 and suffering a severe failure. So being good at something also increases your chance of failing spectacularly, which seems odd. Step Dice avoids that issue, so I'm surprised more people have embraced it. So I've had a lot of discussion with Your Evil Twin about this subject over on Discord after he asked the questions. I'm going to be repeating some of this, but hopefully try to answer the question as well. It's a great question, and let's kind of take it in chunks. So I'm going to start at the bottom, the very last paragraph, and just address that if other people feel that way, that's very incorrect kind of interpretation of how the rules work. The Year Zero engine now has probably 7 or 8 games that have been published for it, and a one doing something bad on push dice only applies to 4 of them. And they apply in 2 different ways. One of them is with Mutant Year Zero and Forbidden Lands. And in those 2 games, when you roll a 1 on your attribute or your gear dice, then you push your roll, then something bad will happen. Well, you'll damage your attribute or damage your gear. However, there's a mention here of if someone has a high attribute and skill, yeah, and it also mentions modifiers. If you get a +1 or -2 modifiers, nice and straightforward, but if someone has blah, blah, blah. So he's saying, being good at something also increases your chance of failing spectacularly. That's not the case, because if you get modifiers, it only adds to your skill dice in Mutant Year Zero and Forbidden Lands. And the skill dice on the one face doesn't have any special, it doesn't do anything on a pushed roll. It's only the attribute, which never changes, and the gear. So that's how it works in Mutant Year Zero and Forbidden Lands. So, being good at something increases your chance of failing spectacularly. I don't agree with that. Obviously, that is the case with you're more likely to roll a 1 with your higher attribute, but I think the way it builds in with willpower and damage to your attributes, I kind of really like how that works. It's kind of high risk, high reward, because you're also more likely to be succeeding on your initial roll the more dice you're rolling. So I don't really, and also Forbidden Lands for me is one of my least favorite systems of the Year Zero engine. And Mutant Year Zero, I like both of those games, but not really for their systems necessarily. Anyway, I think other games do pushing and do this sort of thing better. In terms of Alien and The Walking Dead, which are the other 2 games that have something special happen on a 1, this is absolutely not the case whatsoever. When you push your roll, you take an additional stress die, and there's only a special icon on the 1 of those stress die that potentially can make something bad happen, a panic event, basically. So any modifiers, any high attributes, skill, gear coming into play, those all are affecting your base dice, which don't have anything special happening on a 1. So really, we're only talking that whole thing is kind of only addressing Forbidden Lands and Mutant Year Zero of all of the 7 or 8 games that have been released for the Year Zero engine so far. So I think because of how they've handled it, it is fairly elegant how they've done it. They've thought about this, and they realized that if they put a 1 on the face of one of the dice, then yeah, as your dice pool gets bigger, the chance of something going wrong, like getting a fumble, if you will, rolling a bad 1, is going to also get higher, which doesn't really make a lot of sense. So they've designed in a way that I think really well addresses that issue. So I just kind of want to discount that. If other people feel the same about that, that's not really how it works. Games like Coriolis, Tales from the Loop, I gotta look at my shelf. Coriolis, Tales from the Loop, and YZE, they don't have any special dice, any special thing happen if a 1 is showing on the dice. So yeah, let's move back up to the top then and talk about why I don't work with step dice myself. And the real answer to this is that I've not played Blade Runner yet. I've not run it. I've not played it yet. I'm planning on. I've actually arranged with my brother and my sister to run the starter set for them early next year. So that'll be my first experience with Blade Runner, and I think I'll like it a lot. I've skimmed the rules, and I really like what's written in there. I'm not anti the step dice system at all. I think it's a really cool, elegant, neat system. It's just that my experience with it so far is just Twilight 2000. And while I enjoyed my time with Twilight 2000, I did say Forbidden Lands is probably my least favorite system. Actually, Twilight 2000 is my least favorite system from the Year Zero engine, mostly because it's very crunchy. It appeals to, compared to the other Year Zero engine games. I know Twilight 2000 fans will say, oh, the first and second editions are way more crunchy. Fine, that's true. But for me, I have a very low tolerance for simulation and crunch, and despite liking traditional games, and that's why the Year Zero engine for me marries that kind of like traditional elements without having too much crunch into it. And Twilight 2000, just being a military simulator role-playing game, is far too much crunch. I would never dream of running or even playing it at a table, because I need Foundry to do all the, like, to handle a big chunk of the crunch for me. And even then, I still have to reference the rules all the time, because there's just so much of it. Internalizing it for me is not that easy. And it's other games, like older games from like the 80s, like Harn, for example, or even Call of Cthulhu or RuneQuest. They have a lot of crunch as well, but a lot of that crunch is front loaded. It's dealt with at character creation, and then once what you see on your character sheet contains most of the crunch. And Harn Master has that really incredible combat work table sheet, but once you figure out how to use it, you're not expected to internalize it. It's just you need to know how it works, and then it's very easy to use. Whereas I feel with Twilight 2000, there are just like so many modifiers for everything and rules for every little thing to capture that kind of simulation, that for me, I just don't enjoy playing it. I'd rather be playing something else, really. And yeah, so that's my experience with the step dice system. That's why I haven't, even though I think the step dice system is really neat, and I'm interested to see what people come up with for it, I'm not interested in crunchy games that use it. In the same way that if somebody creates a very crunchy D6 dice pool game, I'm not going to be interested in it at all either. So really, that's kind of why I'm not using it. Is I didn't really enjoy my first experience with the step dice, and I'm looking forward to Blade Runner. I'm looking forward to playing that. I haven't been putting it. Maybe I have been putting off playing with it or running it until now because of the step dice system, maybe. But maybe if so, then that's a subconscious thing. So yeah, that's probably why. And I wonder if other people in the community feel the same. The people who are developing games, they tend to focus on the D6. But I think that's also because there are some really amazing, elegant D6 systems, like Alien. Alien and The Walking Dead, for me, are just incredible. I think they are both I know probably Alien is my favorite Year Zero engine game, and they both are just, I don't know, mechanically they work really, really well. I love that like panic die, the stress dice, and the panic system in them both. And of course, The Walking Dead has a solo mode, which I developed, which I had a lot of fun doing. And because it's such a narrative game, it was just, I don't know. Yeah, it's really great. I'm not a huge Walking Dead. I mean, I am a fan of The Walking Dead up to a certain point in the TV show. Then I lost interest, like a lot of people, never watched it to the end. And I love the zombie genre, so I do kind of enjoy that. But Alien for me is just like, it's an awesome setting. It's really well developed. There's a lot of additional content that's come out from it. I want to play more of Alien. I really do. I want to try Alien solo. There's so many things I want to try with Alien. It's just amazing. And yeah, it uses D6s, sure. And for me, I'm just familiar with the D6 system. My first ever role-playing game was the West End Games Star Wars D6 game, where you're rolling lots of D6. So for me, I'm sure there's a nostalgia factor there compared to D&D people who are rolling D20s. And, they might look at a game that uses only D6s and say, what are we playing, Monopoly? Which I know your evil twin has mentioned in Discord that somebody said that to them in a D&D group when he was playing one of the Year Zero engine games with them. What are we playing, Monopoly? Only D6s. I'm a dice junkie. I have tons and tons of dice, polyhedrals, crazy shapes and sizes, whatever. You kind of mentioned it. I've probably got them. And yet I still like this D6 game. There are lots of reasons for it. I'm going to link an article that somebody's written about why D6 systems like Year Zero engine are so good, and it's kind of a nice article that goes into a lot of details. I don't want to kind of just rehash that, but there are some really interesting things to think about there. It's true that there's a big handful of dice that can go a bit wild on the table. And that's why I play with dice trays and a dice tower. Sometimes with the dice tower, sometimes with the dice tray. But it is a requirement if you're playing with Year Zero engine on a table, because you're right, they do go everywhere. So get a dice tray. Simple as that. Yeah, it's a problem, so get one. And then the problem goes away. And yeah, I think, games that are going to appeal more to a D&D crowd, that's also relevant. So if you have a D&D group, they might find that the step dice system is more to their liking because they get to use different dice than a D6 game. That's also absolutely fine. I don't know what else I can say about it. I think I don't think that there's anything inelegant about the D6 system. I think that it's a really great way to play. I kind of like as well how although I like D100 a lot, I also like how it's hard to internalize what the odds of a roll are for D6 dice pool games like the Year Zero engine, because it kind of pulls you out of the meta of thinking, oh, I've got a 96% chance, or I've got a 65% chance of a success on this roll, like you would get in a BRP or a Wolfrup or something sort of game, to being like, okay, I'm gonna roll 5 dice and one of them has to be a 6. Do I want to do that? And I can always push it as well. There's kind of like I'm still able to internalize, like, yeah, if all 5 of these if I roll all 5 of these and none of them come up with a 6, well, yeah, that's probably gonna happen, or it's likely to happen. But the more dice I roll, the more likely one of them is gonna be a 6. I don't know. I feel that there's a level of intuition in it where you don't need probabilities, you don't need the numbers, the maths. I have a degree in pure maths, so I'm kind of probably the type of person who should hate this sort of thing. But I find when running a game, staying in the narrative is really important. And I know this doesn't really apply to step dice either. Step dice is exactly the same. It's probably even harder to realize what the odds are with a step dice system than with a D6. But I'm just talking about, you mentioned the D&D crowd. I've gone off on a tangent. I don't know what else to say about this topic other than I feel that there are advantages. There's an article I'm going to link down in the description, which talks all about the what makes this sort of D6 dice pool system great. Go have a read of that, and I just really enjoyed. And I think for me, as I said before, in closing, a big part of that is the nostalgia factor because of WEG Star Wars being my first game. And if D&D had been my first game, then maybe I would feel very differently. Maybe I wouldn't be playing any Year Zero engine games at all. But yeah, I'm glad that it was my first game, and I'm glad that I'm into the Year Zero engine system because I play a ton of systems. I'm not just about the Year Zero engine or just for Free League. One of my other favorite games is Wolfrup and Delta Green, for example, both D100 games. I really like Electric Bastion Land and Mouse Ritter, which are D20 games. I love all games. The dice is just a way of randomly generating numbers, and yet I find that the dice pools are the most satisfying way of randomly generating those numbers. There's something just about it that I really enjoy. And it feels intuitive to me for some reason, even though the maths are hard to think of. I can't just work out the probabilities of, the likelihood of getting a 6 on a pool of 7 dice. I don't have that instantly in my head. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, drop another comment in this video, or if somebody's watching this, they want to go ask a few more questions around it. Drop a comment in the down below of this video. And your evil twin, if you want to kind of have me focus on some element of that next month, then just drop a question in the December Q&A post, and I'll happily expand on it, on my thoughts on it, my views on it, my opinions next month. Anyway, that's me for this month. Thanks for watching, and catch you next time. Cheers.